Today in our 2014 Ford F-150, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs for the rear axle, part number F2525. So I have my truck pulled up to my camper here, and if you ever towed a heavy camper or hauled a heavy load, a common problem is that the sag we get in the back of our truck. The back end will get pushed down, the front end will raise up, and you kind of get that floating feeling when you're driving down the road because the front tires aren't making that good at contact, and we're putting a lot of stress on the rear suspension. So before I fully hook up my camper, I'm going to take a few measurements. So at the center point of my fender well is just right at about 37.5 inches at the back. Now on the front, we're right about 35.5 inches. So let's go ahead and hook up our camper and see what those measurements are. So with the full weight of my camper on my truck, you can obviously see there's quite a bit of difference back here. We dropped a little over 2 inches in the back. Let's move up to the front and see what happened up there. And in the front here, it actually raised up about 1/2 inch, which again is going to cause those problems where our tires are going to wear out faster. And honestly, we might be going down the road blinding people with our headlights because they're going to be pointing up. Now our airbags are designed to help support that load and bring our truck back up to factory height. They're designed to handle up to 4,800 pounds, but keep in mind that they're not going to increase the payload of our truck, and you should never exceed the manufacturer's recommended towing weight. With our bags inflated at 50 psi, we brought our ride height in the back right back to the factory specifications. And up front, we're right at where we should be, back to the factory height. What that's going to do is take out all the unnecessary stress off of our rear suspension, bringing it back up, helping support the weight of our camper. Now it's also going to make sure that our headlights are aimed in the correct direction rather than pointing up to the sky, and making sure that our front tires are firmly in contact with the ground so we don't get that uneven wear or that really loose steering feeling when we're driving down the road. Another benefit to our airbags is it's going to prevent our frame from coming in contact with the axle and bottoming out. And it's going to provide a cushion, giving us a lot more of a comfortable ride when we're driving down the road. So here's what our bags are going to look like once we have them installed. Now they are designed to go in between our leaf spring pack and the frame here, and our airbags are going to include all the necessary hardware and brackets to get it installed. Now this is specifically designed for our F-150, so we're not going to have to do any kind of drilling, and all the brackets are going to be custom made. The operating range for our airbags is going to be between 5 and 100 psi, and they are compatible with compressors, so we don't have to get out and manually inflate them, but they are sold separately. And the double convoluted design of our airbags means it's going to have minimal lateral expansion, so we're not going to have to worry about coming in contact with any other components around it. Our airbags are going to come with dual manual inflation valves, so that way they can work independently from each other for those off-center loads. It's also going to come with this no drill bracket, so we don't have to drill into any part of our truck to get them installed. So now that we've seen our airbags and gone over some of the features, let's show you how to get them installed. To begin your installation, you're going to want to lift the back end of your truck by the rear axle and make sure that it's supported with jack stands and that it's not going to move around on you. And we went ahead and removed our rear tires as well. Now the easiest way to get in there and remove it is if you take a 13mm socket and a short extension, and you come straight up into the center of the joust stop. I'm going to get that in position first, and then put my ratchet in there, and we can remove it. There's just very limited room in between the joust stop and the axle, so it's easier to get that socket in first. And once we have it removed, we can pull it out, and the bolt that was holding our joust stop in, just flip it over, the bolt will come out. We're going to want to hold on to the bolt, but the joust stop itself is not going to be getting reinstalled. So we can start to assemble our airbag. These little rubber caps, we can go ahead and pull those off. And that'll expose the studs underneath, and the one in the center is going to be a threaded hole. Then we can grab our bracket, and we'll line up the studs with the 2 holes, and then the larger oval hole will fit to where that threaded section is. I'm going to grab the 3/8 flange nuts. I'm just going to put these on there hand tight for now. Then we can grab the valve. Now it's going to have some red thread locker or sealer on there. We're going to get this started by hand, but then we want to make sure that we tighten it enough to where that thread locker is going to fully engage and get it as tight as we can, but you don't want to crush it whenever you start tightening it down. So with everything started by hand, we'll take a 1/2 inch wrench and we'll tighten up our fitting. And whenever we're tightening this, keep in mind that this flat section is going to be going towards the outside. So typically you're going to want to have this pointing towards the back of the truck or wherever you need to, depending on where you're going to mount your valves. You just want to make sure that we have easy access to the fitting so we can put our line in later. With the valve tight, I'm going to come back with a 9/16 socket and tighten up the flange nuts on top. Now if we take our bag, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. We'll see that we're going to have a threaded hole on the bottom. So we're going to want to grab our lower bracket. Now these are numbered, so you want to check your instructions to make sure you get the correct one. And that flat piece that's sticking out on the upper bracket, you want to go towards the flat side that doesn't have the ears on the lower bracket. We're going to line it up, but in our situation we're working with a 2-wheel drive truck, so we are going to put the spacer in place. So line that spacer up with the hole in the bottom of our airbag, and we'll take our lower bracket, loosely line it up. Then we're going to take the long bolt, because we're using that spacer, and we're just going to get this threaded in hand tight. You want to make sure you leave it loose so everything can still kind of move around a little bit. So once we have it all set up, the flat side and that lip should be on the same side, and the ears should be on the back of our bag. With our airbag assembled, we're going to put our frame bracket in place. Now these are also labeled and numbered, but we're working on the left side, so you want to grab the bracket that has the L on it. We're going to take the factory jout stop bolt, and on the bottom of the bracket here we're going to have a hole that's going to go into the bolt's going to go into that, and we're going to line it up and use that factory bolt to put it back in place. So we'll get in there hand tight, make sure it'll hold the bracket up and it starts threading, and then we can fully tighten that bolt up. You do want to be mindful because there is some lines and some brake lines and electrical cables that are on the other side of the frame. Our bracket's going to clear them. You just want to be mindful of everything else that's going on back there. Now our kit's going to come with some handle nuts or plates. On the other side of our frame there's going to be a large hole in the center, and we're going to feed this in so we can line it up and have our bolts go through. But before we do that, we want to bend the plate so that we can get it in a little bit easier. So if we just take the threaded section sticking up and we grab the handle and put your thumb towards the bottom, we're going to bend this in to where it's about a 45-degree angle, so when we put our plate in, we can still have a handle sticking out, able to maneuver it around. So we're just going to take our plate, and again, watch those brake lines and the electrical cables there. We're just going to feed our plate in, and I'm actually just going to leave the handle loose right here. I'm going to go to the back towards the outside, that way I can watch to see where that threaded section is and move it back and forth till I can get my bolt lined up. So I'm just going to reach over the top of the frame, and we can take one of our 3/8 bolts. Once we have our plate lined up, and it's going to take a little bit of patience and a little bit of time to get everything lined up, and you may have to bend that handle a little more or bend it back a little bit to get the angle correct as well. And once we have that bolt started, I'm going to go ahead and leave it loose, and we'll put the other one in as well. So we can take our airbag assembly now, and the tabs here that have the 2 holes are going to fit in between our frame bracket, and we're going to be using the lower 2 holes to mount it up. So you're going to want to take your airbag, It's going to straddle around the leaf spring pack. I'm just going to compress it down and tilt it in till our ears at least get inside of there. Then we're going to take a 3/8 bolt, and from the inside going out, we're going to bolt through our upper bracket through the frame bracket. So again, you just kind of want to push down till the holes line up or get them close. And we're going to have at least one bolt going through, and just to hold it in place, I'm going to take another one of those 3/8 flange nuts and just put it on there hand tight. And we're going to do that for all 4 holes on our upper bracket. Once we have all this hardware in place, we're going to come back and tighten up those 3/8 bolts that were going to those frame handle nuts. Now you don't want to tighten these too much, and when you go to tighten them, you want to kind of peek on the inside and make sure that handle nut isn't pressing against the brake lines or any electrical lines that may cause any damage. Now for these bolts, again, I'm going to be using a 9/16 socket, and you may want to use a short extension just to get yourself some room so you can get access to it. Now we can tighten up the upper bracket bolts. You're going to want to get a 9/16 wrench to hold the bolt on the inside, and a 9/16 socket to tighten up that nut. Now we are going to have a little bit of movement on this lower bracket of where it can be positioned. You just want to try to get that bag as straight up and down as you can. And again, just make sure that that bracket is straddling the leaf spring pack. Then we can grab our bail clamps, and there's going to be a hole on either side of that lower bracket going across the leaf spring pack. So you're going to want to feed it through the holes, making sure that it lines up and goes all the way through. Then we're going to take some more of those 3/8 flange nuts, and we're just going to loosely thread them on. And we're going to have a clamp for the one on the front as well as on the back. Just towards the front here, you want to keep an eye on that emergency brake cable and anything else that may be in the way. You don't want to crush it with that clamp. So we'll get this one in place hand tight, and then we can come back and start tightening all the nuts up. Again, I'm going to be using a 9/16 socket, and you just kind of want to alternate going back and forth between the two a little bit. So we'll tighten one up, move to the other side, and just go back and forth, alternating, tightening each side. Then once we make contact with the clamp to the bottom of the spring, we'll move to the other bail clamp and do the same thing, alternating, going back and forth. Now after those are tightened, we're going to come back and we're tighten up that 3/8 bolt on the bottom. Now it's going to be easiest to use a wrench to tighten it up, but if you have an extremely shallow socket, you can use that. Just want to make sure that we get it nice and tight, and you don't forget to tighten that nut up. So with this side done, we're going to repeat that on the other side. And the only difference is we're not going to have any brake lines to deal with our frame bracket. And we're going to find the halfway point. And the easiest way is just put both ends together and run your hand down so you get to the end right here. And we're going to want to cut our airline tube. You want to make sure you use a tubing cutter so you have a nice clean straight cut. You don't want to use a pair of diagonal cutters or anything that may kind of chew up the end. That way it'll prevent any kind of leaks or anything else. So now we're going to take the end of our airline tube and find our fitting, and we're going to push the airline tube in pretty firmly into our airline tube until you feel like it kind of bottoms out. It's always a good idea to give it a quick tug, and that'll lock in place. Now for any reason you need to remove it, that small ring that's on the fitting there, if we just kind of push in on it and pull out on the airline at the same time, the airline will come out. For now, we're just going to take our airline, make sure it locks in, and we're going to route this towards the back of the bumper. So I'm going to go ahead and route both my airlines, and I'll show you how I did it. So both my airbags, I ran along the outside of the frame here until I came to the very back by the bumper. Then I went over the frame towards the center. The one coming on the passenger side, I just routed towards the driver's side of the vehicle, and I left all the excess airlines on both of them. That way, if any repairs or any kind of movement needs to happen, we have this extra airline readily available. So now we just need to hook up our inflation valves and hook them up to our airlines. Now, where we're going to mount our inflation valves, we do have a few options. We can drill into our bumper and mount them directly there, or we can use the no drill bracket in order to install it onto a nice flat section. So we're going to mount ours directly to our hitch here, and they do provide you with a couple nylon ties. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to go through the bracket and we're going to feed it up over the hitch until we can grab it on the other side. Just make sure you don't catch any electrical cables or your airline with it. We're just going to wrap it around the hitch, make sure it's sitting where you want it to, and we'll just tighten down that zip tie. I would suggest moving that locking section of the zip tie out of the way so we have room to get our airlines in place. We'll go ahead and put the other zip tie on, and then we can cut the tails off. We're going to take our inflation valves, go ahead and remove the cap. We'll remove the nut that's on there. And we'll take one of the flat washers that's in our kit. We'll slide it over the valve. We're going to feed our valve through the bracket. Put another flat washer in place. And then for now, we're just going to loosely tighten up that nut. And we'll do the same thing for the other inflation valve. So then I'm going to grab a 1/2-inch wrench. I'm just going to hold the back side of the inflation valve because we just want to snug these up. You really don't want to go crazy tight because it is just securing it to plastic, and there's not a whole lot of pressure that's going to be put on these. So you just want to snug them up. And we'll do that for both of them. And then on the back of the valve, we're going to have the same kind of fitting that we had on top of our airbag. So you're going to take the appropriate airline, the one on the left side valve, be from our left side airbag. Just going to push it in just like the airbag, and the same thing for the right side. Then we're going to want to put some air in both of our bags and make sure they're not leaking. I'm going to take a spray bottle with some soapy water. I'm going to spray down all my fittings and the airbags and anywhere that there's a connection point. Now what we're looking for is some bubbles to pop up, but if we don't have any bubbles, that means that there's no leaks in the system. So we'll continue to spray everything and make sure that it's not leaking. So with no leaks in our system, all we have left to do is put our wheels and tires back in place. And that'll finish up your look at the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs for the rear axle, part number F2525 on our 2014 Ford F150.